All right.
We're live.
We are live. The first episode of Tank Talk, brought to you by Sports916. And welcome. It's the debut episode. Hopefully not our last episode. So Tank Talk is basically a show where we're going to break down the latest and greatest in Sharks hockey. My name is Chad Thurston. With me is Nolan Torrey. And we basically are a couple big Sharks fans that decided we want to talk about the Sharks a little bit. And we got a forum to do that somehow. So let me talk to you about myself first. I became a Sharks fan. I'm pretty new, actually. 2011-2012 season was really when I first started watching. Nolan actually moved in with me as a roommate and didn't give me a choice but to watch hockey, which turns out to be a great thing because thank you. I ended up loving the sport. And the first player I fell in love with was Jamie McGinn, who was, of course, then promptly traded after I bought a jersey. I don't even think my jersey had arrived yet before he was traded off the team. So that's what you get for liking somebody. What really got me into hockey was it's a fast-paced game. It's very physical, but also very mental. There's a lot of smart and dumb decisions you can make in hockey, as I'm sure we'll talk about throughout the course of this episode. And I don't know, I guess the other thing I'll talk about, my favorite player is Marc-Edouard Vlasic, although that's been a rough favorite player to have this season.
Right.
And then I'd say probably my greatest memory was me hiding behind the couch during the first playoff season that I saw, because I couldn't take the amount of stress and excitement from watching a playoff. Nolan was laughing at me quite a bit, and then we went out and got milkshakes afterwards.
Yeah, playoff hockey is heart attack hockey, we'll call it, or hold your butt cheeks tight hockey, right? So myself, I'm a partial season ticket holder for the Sharks. I've been for, I don't know, as long as I can remember now, probably 8 to 10 years. In fact, I'm going to the game tonight, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Should be a very good game. But love hockey, live and breathe it, and we want to give Greg Ball a shout out for giving us this forum to talk about Sharks hockey, and I'll let Chad go into what we have on the agenda for today.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about a couple good topics. One, we're going to talk about the recent and upcoming games. So we're going to recap Colorado. We're going to talk about Tampa Bay coming up. We're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic lately, which is Department of Player Safety. If you're a Sharks fan, you probably have some opinions on them. Probably all have the same opinion on them. The next thing we're talking about is the first half review. And actually on Sportstalk916.com, Nolan posted a really great review of the entire team. We're not going to get into the whole team step by step, but we're going to talk about just as a whole what our observations are, and kind of talk about what our hopes are for the second half. The last thing we're going to talk about is the NHL All-Star Game, which is in San Jose next weekend. So we're going to talk about a couple weekends from now. So we're going to talk about
25th and 26th, I think, of January.
We're talk about who's in from the Sharks and kind of what that's going to look like. And then if there's anybody who wants to ask questions, we can answer questions along the way. So let's start off right away with just a recap of the Colorado game that just happened. Nolan, why don't you go ahead and start?
Yeah, so it was a wild game, right, which kind of apparently is the theme lately, dating back to the Calgary game, which is probably one of the craziest games you'll ever see. But it looked like it was off to a good start. The Sharks got a power play early and converted right away. Pavelski had a nice one-timer from just within the face-off dot. No worries, Steve. Happy to have you join us. So they got ahead early with the power play. After that power play goal, they didn't look too good most of the first period, but fortunately Colorado decided to keep taking penalties, led to a 5-on-3, and Burns was able to fire one home from the point, pretty much a bomb one-timer. So they took a 2-1 lead into the second period. The second period, they started taking the game over, right? They ended up stretching it out to a 5-1 lead. Donskoy had a beautiful goal, dangled around a couple of guys, wrapped around. It actually ended up going off a defenseman's stick and into the net, but it was still nice goal. And then the third period, all hell kind of broke loose. Colorado got back in it, ended up being a 1-goal game. And Jones, even though he'd given up 4, kind of bailed them out at the end of the game. The final minute or so, Colorado had a lot of opportunities to tie it up and get back in the game. And I think the story of that game, Chad, right, was the injuries on defense started to pile up, right?
Yeah, so I think the big unfortunate takeaway from the game was, basically 2 defensemen are out by the end of the game. So we lose Braun fairly early on. Looks like a knee injury of some kind, just tweaks it. Doesn't seem to take a big hit, just steps wrong or something and tweaks his knee a little bit. He's now on IR. And then Vlasic in the third period goes down basically with a wrist injury. If you look at the footage, it looks like he actually toppled over, I think it was Goodrow, and falls to the ice. So maybe he just fell wrong or something. So in the last half of the third period, you're playing with 2 of your defensemen down. Everybody's gassed at that point. And I think that's part of the reason why we let some goals get in. It's hard to play defense with 4 tired defensemen running around.
Yeah, and one of them, right, and Joaquin Ryan, who hasn't played in a while. The only reason he even got in was Carlson's suspension. Then Heed went down after Heed came in for 1 game and scored right away. Then, of course, Heed gets hurt. And I always whine on my Twitter about how DeBoer never gives ice time to Ryan. Well, he was forced to play that Colorado game. He ended up nearly 20 minutes because of the injuries to Vlasic and Braun. But admittedly, he was not very good that game either, forced into kind of a bigger role. And I feel like his issue in general is like when you're not getting much ice time and it feels like you make one mistake and then you're on the bench the rest of the night because, I mean, he's sat out most third periods early in the season. I feel like he's playing scared out there. And that didn't help their situation. And then you got basically, 3 guys in Burns and Carlson and Dillon. And Burns and Carlson ended up playing almost 30 minutes that night, so they're going to be gassed.
I think you're right. I think Ryan's always worried he's going to make that mistake that's going to get him put on the bench. And that's not necessarily a good way to play. He's got to be given the opportunity to screw up, shake it off, and get back in the game. I think that we got lucky, honestly. I mean, Jones, you and I were talking about this, but Jones had some really good stops that night. Something he's not known for, but stopped some breakaways. And that final save at the end of the game, I think was a huge one. I mean, that's what really got it so we won the game. I didn't want to go into overtime at that point.
Yeah. Steve, we'll get into your question here in a little bit. Steve is asking about Jacob Middleton, who was just called up from the Barracuda, and whether he will play tonight. We'll get into that when we get to the preview for tonight's game against Tampa Bay. But, I mean, obviously the Sharks have had a tendency of blowing leads, right? And a lot of fans will look at the Colorado game and say, oh, here we go again, 4-goal lead. They almost blow it. But I really think it was kind of a unique situation, not only the defense injuries, but playing in the altitude in Colorado. I mean, those guys are sucking wind a lot of the games. So I think it was more of a factor of circumstance than necessarily a trend.
I agree. And you really, I almost feel bad for Jonesy, right? Like he's got a fairly bad save percentage going this year. You're talking about a game where there was a pretty good grasp on the game. He's playing really well. He's keeping them to 1 goal. And then it kind of falls apart at the end there. They get a win, but he gets 3 more goals on his stats, which sucks to be him. But I thought there were some really good takeaways from the game though too. I mean, for me, Donskoy is one of the big ones. Like he's been huge the last few games. And there's been a lot of complaining about how he's been playing this season, coming from me and other fans. But he's finally stepping up and scoring some goals, and seeing it multiple games in a row means it's not just a fluke, right? It's not, oh, he got 1 goal. It's okay. After 3 games, we can start to get a little excited about his game.
Yeah. When I was drafting the blog post on the midseason grades, I had him as a C- originally, and then he's finally got demoted to the 4th line for 1 game. I don't remember who that was against. And he had an assist to set up a goal for Belker in front of the net, and that game seemed to wake him up. Putting him on the 4th line seems to have sparked him, and that line that he's been playing on with Hurdle and Kane has been very good. He's, I think, scored in a couple games in a row now. So it's good to see him get going, and that's been a huge factor the last couple of games for sure.
And I would say that Hurdle is another good conversation piece. Like him going to center, finally seemed to find his groove at that position, and working really well with Donskoy and Kane. You know, I mentioned Hurdle. Nolan and I text a lot during the game, so I texted Nolan. I told him that Hurdle plays better defense than some of our defensemen.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. He's an all-around player, right? He's playing hard in the defensive zone. He's able to skate up the middle. He's able to score goals. He's able to make passes. He's a big body that hits people. I think he's finally coming into that groove in that center position, which is what we need.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, he's obviously a very different type of player than Logan Couture, but I think he's becoming as complete of a player as Logan, or at least headed on that same path. And the point you bring up about playing center is huge, right? I mean, they've always wanted him to play center, and the first couple of years it just wasn't happening. He was much better on the wing with Thornton and Pavelski, especially his rookie year. And I think as a young player, he was sort of overwhelmed by the extra responsibility that comes with playing center, right? I mean, you have to be much more defensively responsible. You're always in the middle of play, and he seems like he's relishing that role now, and I think that's why he's playing so well at center. I mean, if you go back to their playoff run last year, even the Stanley Cup run, I mean, he's consistently been one of, if not their best players in the playoffs, which kind of speaks to how much of a leadership role he's taken on the last year or so.
For sure. And I think that maturity is there too, where, you know, before he would have tried to always take the puck in himself. I mean, not that he couldn't, he'll skate past four guys and score a goal, but I think learning that when to pass, and maybe even learning from Joe Thornton when not to pass, has helped him kind of become better in that, like you said, leadership responsibility. So I see him. I see him as an alternate captain in the future. Honestly, like
if the guys can understand what he's saying, right?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure he's getting better, and I mean, they all seem to love him. So I think he'll be
it's
there.
Impossible not to like that guy with how happy he is. All right, let's move on to previewing the game tonight. So, what are your thoughts on this one, Chad?
I mean, a lot of it comes down to, I think, who's able to play defense tonight. Obviously, Bronny's out because he's on IR.
Yep.
Simic was skating, but I haven't seen any update on whether he's actually cleared to play. And just skating on the ice isn't the same as being out there to take hits.
Especially with a concussion, right?
Yeah. A lot of those guys come back and skate early, but doesn't mean they're back in the game.
Yeah.
And then Vlasic was skating, but legs weren't his problem. So it's hard to say if his wrist is going to be too bad for him to play.
If you had to guess, who do you think's in and out tonight on defense?
I think Vlasic plays.
I agree.
Honestly, I think he's been playing injured all season in some way.
Let's hope so. If not, there's a problem.
So, I mean, I think that it becomes one of those, are you hurt or are you injured kind of questions. And I think his wrist hurts. I don't think he's injured. So I think he wraps it up and he comes in and plays. Simic, I don't know. I mean, I think
Simic sits out, right? I mean, the Sharks historically are pretty cautious with concussions, and they should be. I mean, that especially now with all the research. So I don't think Simic plays tonight. I do think Vlasic is in, like you said. Braun, we know, is out. So if Vlasic is in, then Middleton will not get in because Hayden Ryan, I assume, will draw in over Middleton. It's possible DeBoer throws Middleton out there, although I wouldn't suggest giving the guy his first NHL game against the best team in the league. But
yeah,
who knows?
Because setting him up for defeat, right? I mean, I guess the only other thing you could do, although no one does this in hockey, but you could say, well, we're just not going to win the game, so we'll play the new guy. We'll put Dell in the net. We'll make it where we give everybody a rest. But I don't think that happens. I think you need the points too bad that you put out whatever you can do. I agree. I think Simic, like, what did Vlasic say? Anyone could pass the concussion protocol if they wanted to. Sure. But I think you're right. The Sharks hold him back, even if he feels like he can go, just to be safe.
I wouldn't be surprised if he misses the back-to-backs on Tuesday and Wednesday versus Edmonton and LA as well. I think we'll see him by next weekend, but before then is up in the air. So the pairs tonight, if we're correct and Simic is out and Vlasic is in, then the question becomes, okay, who's paired with who? Chad and I have talked about this a lot, that I don't like the idea of breaking up Brendan Dillon and Eric Carlson. Carlson's finally found his groove. Why mess with it at this point? It's kind of funny because back in training camp, Kurz and a few other Sharks beat writers were kind of proposing or thinking that DeBoer would pair Carlson with Carlson with Dillon to start the year. And when I initially heard that, I thought that was the dumbest idea on the face of the planet. It seemed like a natural fit. You put your two best players together on defense, Vlasic and Carlson. Obviously, it didn't work initially for whatever reason. You could blame it on Vlasic struggles. You could blame it on an adjustment period for Carlson. And maybe they figure it out if you put them back together. But at this point, I mean, I don't see any logical reason to break that pair up.
I mean, with how well Carlson's playing now with Dillon as his partner, and not only that, but honestly, how well Dillon's playing with Carlson next to him, I think you're stupid to break up that pair. Carlson hasn't played well with anybody else the entire season. I also think, like, if you're going to bring in Heed and Ryan, you got to play them together. I feel like they've played so much down the AHL together. They've got a lot of good chemistry. They're probably one of the better pairs in the AHL. You keep them together, which means, unfortunately, the 44-88 match, which I don't personally like.
They haven't had a ton of time together, though, so it's hard to evaluate because they rarely play together. I mean, every once in a while they'll get out there together during the game, but I don't think they've played a full game together ever, very rarely.
It sounds like it would be good, right? I mean, on paper, you're talking about you've got your most offensive defenseman and you've got your most defensive defenseman to complement each other. But yeah, when I've seen them out there together, they don't click well.
Yeah.
But I think to me, those are the lines you roll. So you go 44-88, you go Bernsey, Vlasic, Heed and Ryan together, and then you got to keep Dillon and Carlson together.
That's what I would do if I had to guess. I'm betting that DeBoer puts Heed with Vlasic and puts Ryan with Ryan. I guess that point would go with
Bernsey,
and then Dillon and Carlson stay together. DeBoer may want to stick with two pairs that have been together quite a bit and then just mix up Vlasic and Heed together and see what happens. But either way, it's going to be interesting, and they're going to have their hands full against Tampa Bay regardless of who's out there on defense, but even more so if Vlasic is out.
Yeah, let's talk about
their
Steve.
opponent, right?
Steve, we're getting to that in a minute. So let's talk about Tampa Bay just a second before we move on to player safety, just because to give an idea of what we're in for, right? So they're in the last 16 games, they're 15-0-1. They didn't lose a single game in December. They've got something like 3 players with 20 or more, 3 forwards with 20 or more.
By the way, the one game they lost was to Winnipeg in overtime, so not a crappy opponent by any means.
Yeah, I mean they're hot, and I thought, hey, coming to California playing with such a time difference, maybe that, especially it's a later game, it's an 8:00 game, but they've played 2 California teams and they didn't have any trouble with them. So,
just to give you guys perspective on how good this team is, I'm going to read off some stats here. So they're 12 points ahead of any other team in the NHL. Toronto and a few other teams are 12 points back. They've played 41 games this year and won 32 of them. 32 out of 41 this season. They have a plus 55 goal differential. They're averaging over 4 goals a game, which is ridiculous in the NHL. Within their conference, the Eastern Conference, they're 21-2. 21-2 against the East. Granted, I would argue the West is a little bit stronger, and obviously the Sharks are in the West, but that's still just a ridiculous stat. They have the number 1 power play. The Sharks have the 5th power play. Tampa Bay's at 30% on their power play. So the Sharks have their hands full tonight, especially with a less than full roster.
Yeah. So what do you think are the keys, if you had a couple keys to the game here?
So obviously the young defense is going to have a challenge. I think the big key is staying out of the box. Given they have the number 1 power play, I'm sure they're going to get plenty of scoring chances 5-on-5. We don't need to help them out at all and give them looks on the power play. They're lethal on the power play, and you give them 3 or 4 chances, they're probably going to put at least 1 or 2 in. And then I think the Sharks have to get out to an early lead. against this team that scores as much as they do, the last thing you want to do is get behind and, Burns and Carlson and Vlasic start getting over aggressive and, they're going to feast on odd man rushes. This is not a team you can give up odd man rushes to. If you do, they're going to put up 5, 6, or 7 goals tonight. And then because of that, Jones has got to be the best version of himself. He's going to be tested tonight, probably more than he's been tested in any other game this year. So he's got to show up.
Yeah, I think we need what I used to call Jones bot, right? Where he just, seems to mechanically make every move correctly. And then I would say that I agree with you. And I think DeBoer actually mentioned it, which is funny because I've been saying it all season, but we've got to quit cheating. The defensemen have to quit cheating to get that offensive opportunity. And it's been great that we've scored so many goals. That's what's kept us winning. The only reason we have the record we have with the number of goals against us is because we're able to put the puck in the net. But I think that that's a trade-off that we're making where we're willing to let them score more often so that we can score more often. I think in this case, you need defensemen to stay home and actually play defense a little more.
Yeah, and with these being two of the top scoring teams in the league, I would not be surprised if this is a 5-4, 6-5 type game. I would not expect a low-scoring game. Of course, every time we say that, it ends up being a 2-1 game, but I would be shocked if there's less than at least 8 goals in this game.
Yeah, after watching the Edmonton game, I think that this game's going to be pretty high scoring.
So what's your prediction for tonight's score and winner?
I think we lose, honestly. I don't want to predict that. Obviously, I always want to root for the Sharks, but I think I can't. I think Tampa Bay puts 5, 6 goals in the net, and I think we're probably around 3, just because we're going to struggle with having so many pieces out.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not too hopeful for tonight. I agree with Steve's comment that if they win, I will be very surprised. I'm not very surprised. It's the NHL. Anyone can win on a given night, and I do think the Sharks are in the top echelon of NHL teams, but they're playing by far the best team in the league, and they're shorthanded. So I think temper expectations tonight. If I had to guess, I think the Sharks force it into overtime and then fall short in overtime. I got 5-4 Tampa Bay in overtime, which I would be happy to get a point out of this game.
Yeah. If I hope your prediction is more right than mine is, for sure. All right, so let's move on to the next topic, which is the one Steve was asking about. So, or kind of asking about Department of Player Safety and Supplemental Discipline. This has been a big sticking point for the Sharks, especially this year, after the Carlson suspension, and then basically watching multiple games of what many fans think are suspendable hits with no supplemental discipline whatsoever. So I think the biggest thing, and obviously you can jump in here, but the lack of consistency, right? That's the biggest complaint, I think.
Well, and I think that it's lack of consistency. So obviously in Sharks Nation, everyone was up in arms when Carlson gets suspended for 2 games for a blindside hit to the head. I thought the initial primary point of contact was the shoulder, and then his elbow kind of rolled through and clipped his head. The NHL, while they agreed in the video that the shoulder was the initial contact, they thought the head was the principal point of contact.
Yeah, primary, yeah.
Which that's debatable. I don't even really want to get into that argument, but the biggest issue I had with that suspension was Carlson has no history whatsoever. This guy barely hits anyone. He even said that on the bench during the game. He told one of the Kings players, I think Jamie Baker mentioned it, or that was the national telecast. So the Kings, Jim Fox was talking about it, I think. He told the Kings, I don't even like checks. So, this is not a guy that has any sort of history. Granted, the guy was injured. I don't know if he's returned yet. I think he missed at least a couple of games, Austin Wagner. But my biggest issue with that suspension was, first of all, he has no history, and second of all, giving him 2 games. I thought 1 game was the maximum sentence that he would face, but evidently not. So
yeah, and I think that what I was looking today at the player safety page and kind of reading through how they make their decisions again, and watch some of the videos and some of the descriptions of penalty or fines they've implemented and everything. And injuries is one of the big ones, right? So it's literally one of the points that they judge. So the downside to me on that is you have a hit like Carlson's where it's questionable if it's really a bad hit, but because there's an injury, now you're giving 2-game suspension. Whereas it might have just been a fine or a single game normally. Because that guy got hurt, it's now a 2-game suspension. Whereas
you're talking about injuries, Shimmick takes a blindside hit, gets injured, still hasn't returned. He may return tonight, but I highly doubt it. And the other big factor with that hit, right, is, okay, the game was clearly over. At that point, it was garbage time. There's 30 seconds left in the game. He gets rid of the puck, and supposedly the threshold is 0.6 seconds, which I don't know how you decide what a threshold.
They slow it down and I don't know.
Well, I mean, I can see how you can measure it, but it just seems silly to have a number attached to that. And Vlasic even commented how stupid that is. But anyway, it's late in the game. It's clearly the guy's taking a run at him because the game had gotten chippy and it was getting a little bit nasty. And turns out he injures the guy. So I was shocked that he at least didn't get a fine. I mean, and the fines that they hand out are a joke. I think the percentage is like $5,000 or something, which, I mean, that's pennies to these guys. It's more of just a symbolic type thing than an actual hurt on their wallet. But I couldn't believe he didn't even get fined, let alone suspended.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I looked at that one. I look at Oliver Ekman-Larsson again, his hit on the bunk, which I really think is actually the worst one. That one clearly to me is a dirty hit. LeBank's not even doesn't see him. It's targeting the head. It's up against the boards. It looks like a bad hit all around. And nothing. They don't even talk about it, right? They don't even review it. I think you almost need something where, I don't know if you let the coach request a review of something.
You mean on ice or after the game, or
after the game? You should be able to submit something to the player safety and say, "Can you look at this, please?" Because when there's nothing, there's no sound, right? So Ekman-Larsson was the big one where I think we all expected there to be some sort of review, but they're going into kind of a break and there's nothing. There's not even. Yeah, we looked at it. It wasn't bad. It's just totally ignored that the hit happened. The Bennett hit, I think. And I know this isn't necessarily the popular opinion, but I think it's a clean hit. I do think it's a little late.
Clean hit, just late, right? Yeah.
That's the big question. Is it late? And to me, why are you laying that hit at 22 seconds left when you're up 8-5?
Intent to injure. Yeah.
That was just ridiculous. Although I blame the officiating on that. That whole game, people were getting away with crap, and whenever that happens, even look at our goalie is slashing people with his stick. I mean, you got to call those, or it's going to build up, and eventually someone's going to lay a hit like that to send a message.
I love seeing Kane, by the way, jump into that pile and try to pull Tkachuk out of it. Tkachuk, I can't even say his name. Keith Tkachuk, I hate that name. Pull him out of the pile and let him know what he thought of his antics throughout the game. Unfortunately, the rest got in the way. And I think that's part of the officiating too. You got to let those guys go and get it out and get it over with. If you don't let it go, then it's just going to keep boiling throughout the game, which is what happened.
Well, and I thought on the Colorado game, I mean, Kane took a clean, but I mean, a pretty big hit and got up and looked like he was going to start something. And I think to some extent he's gun shy. I mean, he's afraid to throw the gloves and get in a fight because he's going to be the one that gets the penalty for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's sad because that's what honestly, at this point, I think that's what we need.
It's like the NFL, right? The guy who retaliates is always the one who gets caught. That's just how it is. I mean, the guy who makes the initial slash doesn't get nothing, and then you respond and you get caught. That's just how it works.
But I think we need somebody on the team who's going to go out and lay big hits or fight when it's necessary, because right now we don't have that. Right?
Yeah,
Dylan's the closest thing.
Dylan, and that brings up a good point. There is some controversy. I think Kurz even wrote an article about it or touched on it in his recent piece that Dylan sat out the entire third period against Calgary, even when that game started to get chippy. And they asked him about it in the one of the post-game interviews, and he said it was strictly a coach's decision, and they didn't really press him on it further. I would have liked to have seen them ask him a little bit more as to why he was sitting. But I don't understand the logic of that. My only possible justification is he didn't want Dylan to go out there and get in a fight and get injured or suspended. But, I mean, at that point, I think you got to put your guys out there that are capable of scrapping to protect the other guys.
Yeah, I think when the game got away from them, I mean, there were a lot of chances where we were only one goal behind, right? And I get saying, hey, let's not go out, let's not take penalties, let's not be stupid when it's this close. But once the games got away from you in the third, they should have put Dylan out on the ice and
Yeah.
made a couple statements. Or in the Colorado game, they could have done it. Or at some point, they're going to have to do it because other teams are watching. And if they know they can go out there and rough up your guys and no one's going to do anything about it, they're going to start doing that. And someone like Couture or, one of the guys who's not a big hitter, more of a skills guy, is going to take a hit that we're not going to like. And if no one does anything, it's going to end up in injury.
Speaking of Logan, I loved both his and Jumbo's reaction on the bench during that whole situation. Then you got DeBoer tossing the water bottle, which I've seen a GIF already created for that, which is great. But I don't want to see Jumbo fight because his knees are going to buckle and give out, and it's just too big of a risk at this point. But God, I would have loved to have seen him out there at the same time. So
he was the other guy to say maybe Jumbo, late in his career, turns into an enforcer now and just goes out and lays hits and gets in fights when he needs to. Because we've seen him fight before, and I mean, I don't want to face Jumbo in a fight.
So Steve, I read that too, that Dylan supposedly has liked some negative posts about DeBoer. I follow Dylan on Twitter. I went on there and looked at his likes because you can look at their likes, and I didn't see anything on there. Granted, maybe he unliked it after that, but I haven't been able to prove that Dylan has liked some anti-DeBoer content on social media, at least that I was able to find.
Yeah, and I'm hoping we don't. I don't want to see our coaching and management and players start getting chirpy with each other on social media or in the news.
We'll leave that to the Ottawa Senators, right?
Yeah, or Dallas.
Former Sharks, Chris Tierney and Dylan DeMello in the cab. Yeah. If you saw that video.
Yeah.
All right. So Department of Player Safety we got through. Let's talk about kind of looking back at the first half of the season, since we're only a couple of games in the second half here. What are your thoughts on the first half? Good things, bad things? What gives you hope? What are you concerned about?
I mean, like I said earlier, I think that I guess the good thing is that we have given up so many goals and we still are up in the rankings. I mean, we were playing for first in the Pacific just a couple games ago with the questionable goaltending that we've had, which gives me hope, because if they can get going, if Dell and Jones can wake up and start making the saves we need them to, I think we become a lot harder team to beat.
The Sharks have the worst save percentage combined in the NHL currently, just to throw that out there. So,
but I mean, that's for where we're ranked. That's kind of surprising, right? You would expect a team with that type of stat to be towards the bottom of the pile. So I think that I'm going to turn that negative into a hope.
It can't get much worse, right? It can only get better.
I don't know. I think that team defense was obviously a problem, and that seems to be cleaning up a little bit, though not as much as I would like. We still fall back on some of those bad habits. Then
Vlasic and Braun are the center of that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Out now, but
I mean, Vlasic and Braun are your shutdown pair. They're the guys you put out against the top line against every team. If they're not playing well, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And I think no one other than Vlasic would say that he hasn't been playing well this season. He's the only one who seems to not know that.
That would be my biggest criticism of Peter DeBoer to this point in the season. I mean, he knows Vlasic and Braun are struggling, yet he refuses to, number one, split them up, and number two, more importantly, not play them against top competition. He still uses them as the shutdown pair every single night. I'm sure we will see them out there tonight against Kucherov and Stamkos, which LeBron's out, obviously, but I'm sure Vlasic will be out there against that line, which will be interesting to say the least. But I don't know how you don't change things up at that point. Either break that pair up, maybe healthy scratch them, which I wrote a piece on Sportstalk916.com as well. But his refusal to do anything different with those two guys, I think, is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. I actually have down like DeBoer some questionable decisions, and I would say Vlasic is one for me for sure. Either A, he's injured, in which case you got to come out and say something, because it's obvious to everybody that he's not playing the way he usually plays.
Right. Yeah.
Or B, it's an attitude problem, and you got to do something to try to fix that. And I think a healthy scratch is one way you start that.
Maybe we can have the CEO release a statement. What do you think?
Yes.
No, I would not encourage that.
No. And then obviously goaltending. So one question I had: do you bring up one of the guys from the Barracudas to play in one of the back-to-backs or a couple of the back-to-backs and see how they look?
Yeah, so I saw a few fans sending that question to both Kurz and Curtis Pashilka of the Mercury News, asking kind of the same thing. What are the Sharks going to do about their goaltending? Would they consider calling a guy up? I don't think that's in the cards right now. If Dell continues to struggle, then I could certainly see them giving a look to either Bebo or Corner. I think Corner made the AHL All-Star team, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Granted, he's a first-year AHL guy, so he doesn't exactly have a lot of seasoning. Jones is obviously secure, right, because of his contract. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. So they're stuck with him for the foreseeable future. Sure, they could try to move him in the off-season, but this season they're stuck with him. Now, Dell, I mean, he's signed for another year after this as well, but I can see them possibly looking at somebody else in a backup role if he continues to struggle. But at the same time, I don't know if he gets enough starts to really fairly judge that, right? I mean, he plays, once every 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, he has the 2 shutouts, and then he has a couple of bad games. That's the other one, I guess, DeBoer question is, I get that Dell's going to his hometown against the Flames, but why are you not playing Jones in that game? It's too important of a game to put on Dell.
A stupid decision. They asked him after the game if he regretted it, which of course he's not going to say yes, but I'm sure he was not pleased with Dell's performance, which I don't blame that game on Dell whatsoever, but still.
And then, so I guess what else gives you hope? Like, or what? We talked a lot about negatives. What are some positives?
Yeah, positives. Joe Pavelski. I mean, last year he had a very down year, and a lot of it was blamed on injuries. I think he had a thumb injury most of the first half of the season, and I think he finished the year with 22 goals. He's already surpassed that this year with 24 goals. He's obviously in a contract year, which is extra motivation. So I don't know whether you credit better health, contract year, maybe a little bit of both. But either way, the Sharks are thrilled with where he's at. Timo Meier has slowed down the last 9 or 10 games. I don't think he's scored. But up before then, he was probably their best forward on the season. Third year in the league, was driving the team most nights, and I think he's sitting at 18 goals currently. So those 2 guys have been huge. Their depth scoring, while individual guys have struggled off and on throughout the year, we talked about Donskoy. Kane has been cold much of the year. They've still had individual guys step up at different times, right? There was a stretch where Pavelski was leading the way, and then Meier took over, and then now the last little stretch, it's been Couture, Hurdle, and Donskoy that have stepped forward. So at any point during the season, there's been 2 or 3 guys that have gotten hot at a different time. They're probably never going to get them all hot at once. That's just not realistic, but it shows you how many options they have. And if 1 or 2 guys are struggling, they're not, screwed in terms of goal scoring.
And I would say on Timo, the thing is, even when he's not scoring goals, he's contributing to the team. I mean, that pass the other night was just ridiculous. So he comes in on the boards, fights for the puck, skates behind the net, no look passes through a narrow gap to a goal scorer. And I mean, I think that a lot of times we get caught up in how many goals does a player have. And I think that's kind of like the LeBlanc argument, right? Like, we look a lot at how many goals is someone scoring and not as much at what are they contributing to the team outside of that. And I think that Timo's got both. He's scoring goals, and when he's not scoring goals, he's making other people score goals.
Yeah. To answer your question, Steve was asking what autographs are on the sign behind me. You're right. McLaren, Ricci, and Anthony Niemi, who I can't stand, but he was available at the autograph table that day at FanFest. So, as far as other positives in the first half, their special teams have been very good, right? Both penalty kill and power play. Penalty kill has slacked off a little bit the last 10 games, as has their power play up until last game versus Colorado. But I'm pleasantly surprised at how high in the NHL rankings our power play is, 5th in the league, considering how long it took for Carlson and Burns and them to kind of figure out the power play. I mean, initially in the season, right? they had Burns and Carlson together on the power play, which, let's be honest, it was a disaster. It just wasn't working. DeBoer broke that up, put them on separate units, and DeBoer will rotate out who starts at the first unit. Sometimes it's Burns, sometimes it's Carlson. He kind of alternates every power play. But the power play has been very good once they separated them. You've noticed the last couple of games, I don't know if you've seen this, Chad, they've started to put Burns and Carlson back out there together to start the power play, which I am not a fan of. I like them separate for two reasons. Number one, it gives you two very good units. And I wouldn't even necessarily mind Carlson and Burns out there together. I just don't like the positioning they're putting them on the ice. So currently they'll put Burns up top sort of as the quarterback on the power play, and then they'll have Couture on the far wall and then Carlson on the near wall, which because of their left and right-handed construction, basically you have 0 one-timers on the ice because if Burns tosses it over to the left, Couture has to do a wrist shot. If he tosses it to the right, Carlson's only got a wrist shot, which admittedly his shot isn't that great. So if they're going to roll that unit out there, I would want Carlson up top. First of all, he's a much better passer than Burns. Burns obviously has the better shot, but Carlson's more creative and I think is more deceptive in that position. And then you put Burns in the Ovechkin spot, right? In the far circle, let him rip away one-timers, and you put Logan on the other corner where he can do the same. And Logan does have a great wrist shot, so I can understand why they put him where they do, but that alignment basically makes Carlson useless, in my opinion.
I just think you don't put them together. I mean, watching the 5-on-3 the other night, and
it was terrible.
Even they just run into each other, right? Like it's just they almost work in the same place. And so when you try to put both of them on the ice, that neither one of them is sure where they're supposed to be. I think you separate them out. You have two good guys from the point, from the blue line that can play on each side. And they're similar Burns has gone, his passes are usually shots, but, Burns is much more an assist guy right now than he has been a goal scorer necessarily. And I think Carlson's the same way. He's more likely to get an assist than a goal. You put them both at the top, you shoot it and you let someone tip it in or get the rebound.
Well, like I said, if you put them both out there, then your second unit, Vlasic's going to see power play time either way, but he becomes a primary point man now on the power play because Burns and Carlson are gassed typically, and they're going to go off as soon as that first unit leaves. So you got Vlasic and LeBanc, and LeBanc's a good power play player, but the other factor there is I like LeBanc on the first unit because that's his biggest strength, right? 5-on-5, he's largely useless, to be honest, at this point in his career. That may change, but to this point, his biggest asset is the power play, so you might as well have him out there on the first unit where he's going to see more ice time in that role. And LeBanc, unlike Carlson, is very good on that half wall. He's got a much better wrist shot, so he's a bigger threat to shoot from there, and he's got tremendous vision and passing, much like Carlson in that regard.
Yeah, agreed. Well, yeah, LeBanc, honestly, you have him on 5-on-5. The nice thing about him is he doesn't screw up, right? So he's not.
Well, he takes a lot of penalties, but
well, yeah. But he doesn't tend to give away big plays. He doesn't tend to cause goals. He also just doesn't get goals. So I think you're right. You got to have him on your first power play line. That's the only reason to have him there. If he doesn't have that, then you got to question why he's on the team at all.
Well, I feel like DeBoer's tried to do what he did with Donskoy. He's put him on the fourth line to try and spark him, but so far it hasn't done much. So he's always kind of a missing in action.
And you're paying him too much to be a fourth line guy who doesn't score goals. So
So looking ahead to the second half, we're already a couple of games into the second half. What are your predictions? How do we think the second half goes, and what are we looking forward to?
That changed a lot before Braun and Vlasic and Simic got injured.
Short term, though, hopefully, right? So.
Yeah, hopefully those are short-term injuries. Braun's the scariest one to me because he actually got put on IR. So you have to question how bad it is when they actually went in and looked at it.
Although he did test it out, so that gives me hope.
Yeah. So I think, once Simic and Vlasic are back, and if Braun comes back, I think you've got a pretty good outlook. I don't think we have any trouble making the playoffs. It becomes a question of, do we have home ice and what's our path? I think if we have to go through Vegas, I know I said this when we were on Sports Talk last time, but that's a tough road for us. If we have to go through Vegas, I think we're in trouble. And So I guess we could hope we don't play them first round and someone knocks them out in the first round. But
Well, it's going to come down to seeding, right? So I mean, it appears the three teams in the Pacific separating from the pack are Calgary, Vegas, and San Jose. Anaheim's on the fringes, and they could still certainly get in the top three. Vancouver and Edmonton, I don't think are a consideration for the top three. They have a chance at a wild card spot, but they're not going to get into the top three in the division. So it comes down to where those three teams finish, possibly four if you include Anaheim in the mix. Right now, Calgary and Vegas are tied, although Calgary has a couple of games in hand. The Sharks are 3 points back of those two teams. But I don't think the Sharks win the division, so that means either Calgary or Vegas takes the division. So, I mean, as far as the first round goes, if, Vegas takes the division, then you're playing Calgary the first round. If Calgary takes the division, then you're playing Vegas the first round. And assuming Calgary and Vegas get through the first round, if they're not playing San Jose, then you're going to play Vegas either way in the first or second round. And I don't think they necessarily need to win the division because, honestly, that's just a matter of seeding. I think what they do need to do is finish ahead of Vegas because I don't see any way they beat that team without home ice. And I know home ice is not typically a big deal in the playoffs, but for whatever reason, the Sharks cannot win in that building. I mean, they did pull out one win there in the playoffs last year in an overtime game that Couture scored a power play goal, but they honestly could have lost that game. Marchessault had a winner that ended the game until the refs decided to overturn it. But they've gotten blown out in that building almost seemingly every time there. Vegas scores a goal, they just get on the roll. So if they're going to beat Vegas, I think they need home ice or they need Fleury to get injured, which let's not rely on that.
And I think, honestly, if we get through, let's be positive. Let's say we get through and, we go to the Stanley Cup. I think tonight's game is the same game you're going to see. I don't think anyone beat Tampa Bay. They're just too hot. So this might be a good preview for, although obviously with injury, but this might be a good preview for what a Stanley Cup would look like for.
And I could see someone else coming out of the East. I mean, I don't think Toronto gets there because their defense isn't good enough, but Washington, they're not going to get there 2 years in a row. That's just too much to ask. Pittsburgh managed to do that a few years ago, but I don't see Washington pulling that off. So Pittsburgh's they've gotten hot lately. Boston's a good team as well. But
Pittsburgh's warming up, which actually they could go on a run. I mean, they have the talent there. They're just old.
Right. I mean, it's pretty much the same team they've had the last few years.
Yeah.
So Tampa is definitely the favorite, but I will say Tampa's had a very good regular season the last 3 or 4 years. They managed to get to the conference finals twice. And I vividly remember Game 7 3 years ago, Pittsburgh and Tampa Bay. The Sharks had already advanced to the Stanley Cup. I was watching that game saying, all right, who are we going to play in the Cup finals? Tampa Bay had that game. I think they were even up 3-2 in the series, ended up blowing it. And I still feel like to this day, if Tampa Bay wins that game, the Sharks win the Stanley Cup, but we'll never know. So.
Yeah, and I had them in my bracket as winning that series. So
I will never forgive Tampa for taking our cup away.
So that's looking forward, but let's look forward not quite as far. Pretty big opportunity, or at least I guess a cool thing for San Jose Sharks fans is that the All-Star game is coming to San Jose. And it's not just a game, right? You get a whole weekend of watching people shoot pucks into nets and goalies try to score goals from the other side of the ice, fun things like that.
Yeah.
So let's take a preview of the All-Star weekend.
So you got on Friday night, I want to say it's the 25th, if memory serves me correctly, is the skills challenge, which I'm not sure if they're adding new events this year, but in past years they've had the target shooting, right? The four corners on the nets, hardest shot, which Burns managed to get thrown into every year because he does have a hard wrist shot, but a slap shot is not that great.
Yeah.
So he always looks like a doofus in that, even though he does have a hard shot. So you have hardest shots, fastest skater, which I don't even know why we have that contest. Connor McDavid's going to win every single year unless he falls down. It's not even close if they put him in it anyway. And then they have kind of like the obstacle course, where they pass the pucks into the mini nets and take one-timers from the red line, and it's kind of a team contest. And so we'll see what else is thrown in there this year, but that will be Friday nights, and then Saturday night is the actual game, or the mini 3-on-3 tournament now. So the two divisions in the West, the Pacific and the Central Division face off, and then the Atlantic and the Metropolitan face off, and then the winner of those two games faces off in the championship round. And it's I'm trying to remember, I think it's a 20-minute game, 10-minute halves for each game, right? And it's 3-on-3.
Yeah. What are the chances that the Pacific doesn't win?
Well, I like to think the home division always has an advantage, and I think the Pacific has won, I think, 2 out of the 4 years since that format started. I know they won the year that John Scott got voted in, and Pavelski and Burns carried him around the ice, which was a cool moment. And John Scott got the MVP award, which I would have loved to have seen Joe Thornton in this game, but we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, I like the Pacific. I mean, obviously you got McDavid, you got Carlson, you got Burns, Drew Doughty. As much as I hate him, I mean, you can't really top those 3 defensemen.
When you're
and 2 of the best goalies too, right? Fleury, who is always reliable, and then John Gibson for Anaheim's had an amazing year. So.
Well, I don't even think you play Burns as a defenseman. I think you play an all Sharks line, honestly.
They probably will, just for fan purposes alone. So you have Pavelski, Carlson, and Burns out there, and then we'll see if Logan gets in. So
what are there any skills you want to see added or removed? I like backwards skating. I want to see a backwards skating race. I think that'd be cool. Hopefully
they could work that into the fastest skating, right? Do 1 lap forward, 1 lap backwards, and make them turn and fall on their ass. I don't know.
I think it's you see the forward suddenly slow down, right? As they have to turn and skate backwards.
The defensemen would win that for sure.
Yes.
So, I don't know. I've had a hard time thinking about this. I mean, there's only so much you can do in hockey. I like the breakaway challenge they do where, the guys keep going, and once they don't score, they're eliminated, and then whoever keeps scoring gets through. Obviously, a Shark will not win that. They're 0 for 9 in shootout attempts this year. Haven't yet scored a shootout goal, so don't hold your hopes high on that one. But I don't know. They got rid of the I don't remember what they called it, but basically it was a breakaway, and it was kind of like this version of their slam dunk contest where, the most creative goal. And 1 year Burns and Pavelski brought out their little ones and scored. Ovechkin,
that's right.
Put on sunglasses, and they always try to do crazy stuff. The issue I have with that event is the goalies are clearly not trying, right? Sure. They're just sort of standing out there, and I understand why they wanted to go in. But I don't know. It's hard to think of new events. As 2 people who might go to these events, what would you rather go see, the skills challenge or the game, or the games, I suppose?
So I guess with a 3-on-3, I actually think the games are interesting. When it was 5-on-5 and no one's going to hit anybody, or you got a bunch of guys on the ice avoiding each other so they don't end up hurt, I think it was less entertaining than a faster paced 3-on-3 game. So the skills competition, I'm not a huge fan of, mostly because of things like we already talked about, right? Burns is going to come out. They're going to say, hey, give us a slap shot, and it's going to get 88 miles an hour, and everybody's going to wonder why he's out there because he's nowhere near what the other defensemen do. But he's going to wear a Wookiee mask at some point, which will be.
Already did that a few years ago, right? So
I'm sure he brings it back out, or something. I mean, something equally as Brett Burnsy. But I think for me, the game would be more interesting to play. It gives them a chance too, with less chance of getting injured, and honestly, goalies that aren't trying quite as hard. It gives them a chance to show off skill a little more. Like they can do fancier things with the puck. They can skate their fastest. So I think that's entertaining. Honestly, I think if we go, it's more because when's the next time I'm going to get to go to an All-Star game?
Yeah. The event itself is like, I've been to an All-Star game before, not NHL. I went to the MLB All-Star game and went to the Home Run Derby, the Celebrity Softball game, and the All-Star game. And I was a kid, so if anything, you'd be more impressed, right? And I remember how disappointing it was. Part of that disappointment was Barry Bonds didn't do the Home Run Derby in his home ballpark. But anyway, All-Star games typically I have found are disappointing in person for the one that I've experienced. So, but you don't want to miss out, right? It's FOMO, fear of missing out. So you want to go because it's not going to come to San Jose again anytime soon. It's already been here once. I don't remember what year. And all I remember is Nolan doing the called shot, which, by the way, they're giving a bobblehead away tonight with that very moment, which I will be collecting and see if Chad can wrangle me into giving him the extra one I'll have. Maybe I'll charge them a little extra. But anyway, yeah, you want to go because you don't want to miss out on, man. And then when you're watching it at home, it's like, oh man, I could be there, and it's kind of that whole thing.
Yeah.
I will give our viewers some insider info if you haven't already looked into it. Per my sources, I'm not going to reveal who because I don't want to publicly blast them because they're kind of important people. There will not be a public on sale for tickets. They haven't completely ruled it out, but I mean, the game is 3 weeks away at this point, so it's not going to happen. So if you're wanting to get tickets, you either need to be a season ticket holder and a full season ticket holder at that, or the resale market. So Ticketmaster, StubHub, whatever website you want to use. So be ready to pay up the yazoo if you want to go.
I think that's the other thing that kind of makes me wishy-washy on it, right, is paying those resale fees, essentially, right? The resale prices to get to go. I would have liked there to be something where Sharks fans have a bit easier chance of getting a ticket. But so let's cover real quick just who from the Sharks is going. And I think everybody's favorite thing to do for the All-Stars is biggest snubs. So I think we have a couple of those to talk about.
Yeah, so the Sharks that got in, there's still one who's pending, which we'll talk about. Brent Burns got in. That was pretty much a
no-brainer
guarantee, right? I mean, not only because of who he is and he's well-known, the games in San Jose, but he's had a great year as well. He's got 43 points in, I want to say, 42 games now, 7 goals, like 35 assists. So he's had a very good year offensively, which, as we know from Norris Trophy voting, is all they care about from defensemen these days, regardless of how reckless you are on the other end of the ice. So Burnsley will be there. Pavelski will be there, which is nice to see. The captain makes it 24 goals. He certainly has earned it. If this game was not in San Jose, I don't know if he makes it, but he certainly deserves to be there. And then Carlson makes it. I think Carlson's nomination is largely because he's a superstar in the NHL. He's well known. They want the name recognition. And again, the game's in San Jose, so they want as many Sharks there as possible. He's definitely earned it the last month or so. He's been fantastic, but his numbers for the year as a whole, I don't know if he would make it if his name wasn't Erik Karlsson.
Yeah, I mean, he's heated up recently, so I think that helped. Like he got hot before the selection. I think that the fourth one, of course, that could go. If you are watching and you have not voted, you can go to NHL.com/vote and you can vote for Logan Couture to go as the last man in. He's the second highest points on the Sharks. I think that he definitely deserves it as far as quality of play. Just maybe not as big of a name as obviously Burns or Pavelski as far as other people in the NHL knowing him. But he could get in. He was one that I kind of thought early on would have a chance at getting in.
And I was surprised too, Chad, and I don't know if you were surprised that, they announced they were going to do the final vote thing before all this started, but I didn't expect them to put 8 names out there per division. Like,
I thought it'd be 4, honestly.
Yeah, 3 or 4. MLB does the same thing for the Baseball All-Star Game, and they usually do 3 or 4 guys per conference or league for baseball. So I expected something similar, and then I see 8 guys per division. And yesterday I spent some time looking through some of the guys nominated, and some of the guys don't even have 20 points on the year. No. So they basically decided, okay, we're going to nominate one guy from each team and basically let the fans battle it out. So there's a few guys nominated that have no business being anywhere close to that game.
Yeah, I did the same thing because I was looking at the first time I went to vote. I was like, I'll vote in each division. Yeah. And I started looking at some of the other divisions. I'm like, I don't even know some of these guys. And I don't watch hockey all day, but I watch quite a bit of hockey. And if I don't know your name, you're probably not an all-star.
I know them, but a lot of them have had down years. Some of them are there because of their names, but it seems like they went with, okay, let's put one guy per team and let the fans basically put in who they want, which I guess that's understandable.
And then to me, the biggest snub on the Sharks, which I think is obviously because of the format and the goal is to get big names in there who everybody knows. But I thought Timo, with the way he's played this year, when I think of All-Star, I don't just think of like who's playing great, but I also kind of who's making a major impact on their team. And I think Timo coming out of nowhere, or virtually nowhere, and having the season he's having this game or this season, I think deserved it. I actually like to see that maybe be something they add into the All-Star game. Like they bring a guy in from each division that is the biggest surprise or the most promising new guy or something like that. Because if you just keep bringing the same guys over and over again, it gets even more boring to me. Like I know who's going to be there. You're not showing me anything different.
I think the NBA and the MLB has a prospects game as part of All-Star Weekend, which is not professionals, that's minor league guys. But the NBA has a Young Stars game, which I think is guys like 23 under. They could do something similar, although nowadays the NHL is dominated by young players, so most of the guys in the game are already that young. But they could do something similar to that if they wanted a separate event to sort of showcase those guys.
And then I think he took himself out, but I think someone we both would have liked to see is Joe Thornton. I think it would have been great for him to come out.
Yeah, so as far as Timo and Joe, Timo, the biggest thing working against him, like you said, is name recognition, and then the last 10 games he's gone cold. But even if he had stayed hot, I don't think he had a chance in hell just because nobody outside of San Jose knows who he is. And there's a lot of guys on this team that are recognized. Carlson, Burns, and Pavelski, and those, of course, are the guys that are going to get the priority. So he certainly was on pace to deserve it, but I don't think he ever had a chance just because of his name. Jumbo, I really, really wanted that to happen. It reminded me so much of the All-Star game in San Francisco when Barry Bonds was at the end of his career and got voted in, even though he didn't deserve it because it was his hometown and kind of the last time he was going to be there, which I know he's a controversial figure, nowhere near the controversy that Joe has, but it would have been a very cool, similar moment. A guy at the end of his career, a legend in the town, and to be able to showcase him in an event like that would have been cool. Does he deserve to be there for his stats this year? Obviously not, but they could have made an exception to just have that moment.
It'd be like a lifetime achievement kind of thing. I mean,
yeah.
He's no doubt a great player. I mean, he's a Hall of Fame player. And I think this season or next season is his last. So I think it would have been cool to have him in there. He would have been a fan favorite, at least for the local fans. It would have been a huge thing. So
I wouldn't be surprised if the Sharks find a way to make him part of the weekend somehow.
Sure.
Maybe he drops the first puck at one of the games or something. Although I'm sure he wants to go back home and rest, but if he's in town, who knows? Maybe we'll see him at some point.
I think he said he already has plane tickets and hotel reservations somewhere. So I think he's not planning on even being in town.
And that brings up our last All-Star topic, right? Ovechkin deciding to bail on the All-Star game. So Ovechkin was nominated as a captain for his division. I think he's 33 years old now, if I'm not mistaken. He's decided to skip out on All-Star weekend, which means an automatic one-game suspension per NHL rules. So two questions kind of with that situation. What do you think of his decision? Does he have the right to do that? Is it kind of BS? What do you think of it? And also, what do you think of the one-game automatic suspension as a result?
I'm torn on it. I mean, so I think an athlete should be able to say, no, I don't want to play in this game that doesn't mean anything. He knows better than anybody what shape his body's in. He knows better than anybody if he's better off resting than he is playing. His chance of getting hurt are a lot less. I mean, if we're realistic, getting hurt on the All-Star game is much less likely than getting hurt in any other game that you go out and play.
Yeah.
But at the same time, anytime you go out there, there's pucks flying, there's people skating, why risk injury on a game that doesn't count on your stats or on your team's stats and doesn't get you anything? So I think he should have the choice. I get the fine. They want to make sure that the big names don't all drop out because I do think that's what would happen. I think if you said no fine, I think nobody who's a big name would show up. I think maybe that'd be a better game. Maybe you'd have all the kids and it'd be fun to watch. But
that's what you see in other sports, right? I mean, Major League Baseball, there's like 10 to 15 replacements every year. The Pro Bowl, nobody wants to go, or it's guys that are still in the playoffs. So the other sports, that ends up with having to get a very watered down version because everyone bails.
Yeah. At least any team where they have a chance at making it, they're not going to want their stars to go. So I get the fine. It's not, again, it's like the fines for injuries. It's not like Ovechkin's going to go broke now because he got fined for.
Well, I don't even know if I think he still gets paid, even though he's suspended a game. I think he still gets paid for it. So he's not even losing any dough other than the dough he could win at the All-Star game. And they could give $1 million to the winning team.
Well, and he almost gets an extra long break, right? Because so by taking a break for the All-Star game, he gets an extra game off as well that his coach can't make him play because he's got a suspension. So,
well, and I think that was part of it. I was reading the other day that you remember a few years ago with the latest CBA agreement, the NHLPA and the NHL agreed that each team would basically get a bye week. Washington's bye week happens to be sandwiched. The All-Star game is sandwiched during their bye week.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to fly all the way across the country. Keep in mind, he's in Washington, D.C., flying all the way out to San Jose in the middle of their bye week. He'd rather take the whole time. So I get it from that perspective. But at the same time, he's Alex Ovechkin, right? I mean, you think of the NHL, there's three names that come to mind: Crosby, Ovechkin, and McDavid.
Yeah.
And he knows that. And he is a centerpiece of any NHL event. And I'm not saying he's obligated to do everything, but at the same time, like when you're a star of the league and you're one of their biggest showcase pieces, like you kind of have to suck it up and do it, in my opinion, even if it's not in the best interest for your team or your personal season. I think it'd be one thing if he was dinged up or injured, which granted pretty much everyone is at this point of the season, but if he's not missing games due to injury, then I think he should be there personally. And if the game was on the East Coast, I think he's probably there. I think the fact that it's on the West Coast is probably the biggest thing. And I think they opened their second half on the East Coast, so he'd fly out and fly back for, a meaningless game, basically.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, it's hard to say, right? I mean, these guys put their bodies on the line every single time they go out there. And I don't want to be the selfish fan who's like, hey, you have an obligation to show up to this All-Star game because you're an All-Star. How dare you be so good at your sport and then not want to come play at the All-Star game?
I mean, it'd be like LeBron James sitting out of the basketball All-Star game. And that's basically the equivalent. So they're held to a higher standard than a normal All-Star is the point I'm making. But I get it. I mean, at the end of the day, they should have some choice. It's disappointing, as Steve commented. It robs some of the fans of the All-Star experience. So perhaps we're biased since it's here in San Jose. We're a little bit bitter.
Now, I would say, I guess the one caveat I would add is he was voted captain.
Yeah.
Right. So I think maybe you say if you're voted captain or last man in, you have to show up. Because that's different, right? The NHL didn't pick you to go because you're a big name. The fans picked you to be there. And I think that might be the caveat I would support is like, hey, if you're a fan picked, you need to be there because the whole reason we're putting this show on is for the fans and they selected you to be there.
Well, if they're going to suspend guys, maybe if the fans voted you in, it's a 2-game suspension. If you don't go, if they didn't vote you in, it's 1 game. I don't know. But I would like to see him there. It's disappointing he's not going to be there, but I'm sure we'll live without it. So
yeah.
The All-Star game is one of those things where as soon as it's over, you kind of forget about it anyway. All right. Well, I don't see any questions, so wrap it up.
Unless Steve, you have any questions or anybody else?
One loyal viewer. We appreciate you, Steve. I will be at the game, by the way, tonight, Steve. If you're there, hit me up on Facebook and we can have a handshake or something.
I will not, unfortunately, be there tonight. Well, or fortunately, depending on how the game ends up. But
Chad's not a real fan. He doesn't go to games.
Yeah. I'm busy being on call for my real job. So, so that's our first show. Hopefully, we'll be back if some people listen and like this. If you are listening or viewing and you enjoy this, please check out Sportstalk916, which is who's kind of sponsoring us being on here. If you listen on the podcast, please give us a review. Let us know how we did. The more people who view it and share it and talk about how good we are, the more people hopefully will check us out. Or how bad we are, then we know to quit and not do this anymore.
Go back to our day jobs.
Yeah, go back to our day jobs. I'll sleep in more on Saturday. So look for us to announce a next show if this one's going well. And thanks a lot for joining.
Thanks, guys. Go Sharks.
And go Sharks.
Say a prayer for tonight. We will do it.